David. David.
He's falling in a beautiful swirling pattern.
David. What is up, everyone? My name is David Wells, and this is the David Wells Experiment. So, I burned the midnight oil last night. I don't even have to do this podcast in order to stay ahead of schedule. I've got several podcasts already uploaded onto YouTube. No, not YouTube, Spotify. Wow, I guess I am more tired than I thought, if you couldn't tell from the sound of my voice. But, yeah, here we are. I normally wake up pretty early, either 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., and that is just my force of habit. Yeah, so I woke up at 6 something, and I was like, do I want to wake up now, or do I want to try to sleep in? And ultimately I couldn't get back to sleep, even though I don't think I got to sleep until like 2 in the morning. So I'm either operating on 5 or 4 hours of sleep. I kind of dragged my feet into the day. I did the usual thing of scrolling, like doom scrolling. But I had this thing of like, you've got to do something. That's been kind of on my mind the last couple days. If you haven't heard me talk enough, like, do something, make something, even if it's trivial, that'll be something. And you have to keep the momentum going forward. So I followed that conviction, and here I am talking to you, even though I'm tired. Although, that being said, I took some Ghost pre-workout. That's the name of the pre-workout. It's not like they made it for ghosts. Otherwise, I don't think I could probably take it. Anyway, I'm starting to feel like that tingly feeling underneath my skin. And yeah, so I guess you could say I'm coming alive. Ironically, from a pre-workout called Ghost, lol. I probably should have taken a shower, if I'm being honest. But I decided to do this anyway. See what comes about. So I was uploading the podcasts last night, and I had this idea of, there's a whole scene in one of my movies, one of the kind of the last ones that I did. It was a very piecemeal process. Yeah, the movie in question was about a character who, he's got this best friend, and then he finds out that his friend went through something, and it becomes his life conviction to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else. I don't want to go into too much detail because it might be a bit strong, but if you've seen Sound of Freedom, it deals with a similar subject matter. Yeah, I'll say that much. He finds out his friend went through something like that. But anyway, although in that movie, the main character was not nearly as cool as Jim Caviezel. Yeah, but anyway, half of the movie is in the present day, and the other half of the movie is just my character and the friend just talking about whatever. And that was just me and my best friend, Jeremiah. We were just shooting the breeze, talking about whatever came to mind. And I realized I could probably upload that as a podcast. So currently, that is what I'm doing alongside talking to you guys. It's funny, I just said you guys. Normally I'd say y'all. Lol. I guess the pre-workout hasn't taken the effect yet, lol. Anyway. Man, I've got to go through the files to find this. Man, that's the trouble with like trying to go find old things. C, D, F, G. You wonder, where did I put this? I'm trying to find the old audio files because at one point I did have this synced up. And you wonder what the heck happened. So what I will probably have to do is, let's see. I'm probably going to have to go back to the project file that I was editing, and then, man, there's so many David Wells Experiment files that I... Oh boy, this might be a bit more of a... This is going to take some time. But anyway, so I was trying to find a podcast to listen to today. There's this old podcast group who I used to listen to more frequently, but not so much nowadays, called the Procrastinators Podcast. And before you go looking them up, wondering what they're like, they're not a very family-friendly... Yeah, they're not a family-friendly podcast at all. They're not like me. But anyway, I just think they're funny and entertaining. So, yeah. I wonder if I put this on like my other hard drive. Anyway, I was trying to look them up, and there was let's see. Yeah, I tried looking them up, and I guess, you know that thing when you're looking on YouTube, as you type, it makes stuff up automatically. Well, that happened, and so I got this whole string of videos like the procedure entry point not found, dynamic link library, error fixing in Windows, and I have no clue what that is, but I was intrigued enough to mention it. Entry point not located, error fixing. And so I guess this is one of those annoying things that pops up when you're trying to do something on your computer. Oh yeah, I feel like we've all come across this. I don't even know what a dynamic link library is, but Dynamic link library. That just sounds cool. Okay, I think I found the audio. Alrighty. It was... Okay, cool. Alrighty, dighty. Shoot. Well, okay, so this won't be as cumbersome as I thought, but yeah. So it's funny, one thing I was doing as I woke up, I realized, I woke up today and I realized, well, I didn't realize so much as I remembered, but it just made me think of when I would have to wake up for school, which has been forever. I remember waking up at like 6 in the morning and we'd all compete to get ready for the day. That was not fun. Man, I wonder who came up with the idea of, I guess, like, who came up with the idea of, like, all right, let's get everybody up at the crack of dawn and have them go to school and learn stuff. I guess it happens from, it must be a holdover from when public education started with, guaranteed public education. Wow, my speech is slurred. I think from the Industrial Revolution, I think there was a thing where it's like, to the best of my knowledge, when the Industrial Revolution happened, there was this fear of like, oh, is everybody going to have a job or something? And they that's when people started doing the thing of like, don't worry, everybody's going to go to school and everybody's lives are going to be awesome. I think at that point, parents could take their kids out of school and have them work. And that's when that started. That was the beginning of like, no, you got to go to school. You don't have a choice in the matter. There's probably pros and cons to everything, but yeah. Anyway, I mean, I guess one reason they decided let's wake everybody up super early is because kids who worked on farms, they were already used to getting up that early. And I also heard that Sunday school at churches used to be much more of a actual school. Like, I heard it used to not be that. I heard that on Sunday school, that was usually when kids would learn actual academic subjects because public school and private education, or like mandatory public school, was not the norm like it is now. But Sunday was when kids would actually learn academic subjects. I kind of can't help but think after 100 something years, like, you would think that the whole one size fits all model does not work for everyone. And they kind of pretend like it does still. I think there are rare exceptions where people realize, like, okay, this doesn't work, but I still look back on high school and have this feeling of like kind of regret. Homeschooling, less so, but just high school and the private school that I went to was not an environment where I thrived. And I have to wonder what things would be like, you know, had in an alternate universe, what does that look like? Where I didn't do what I did. I kind of don't like it's so funny, like the private high school that I went to, it, I'm using major air quotes, private high school, and I'll try to give, I'll try to be nice, but at the same time, I will be truthful. The high school I went to was called Calvary Chapel Christian Academy. Um, if you're one of my regulars, it is that it is located in this church that is in the Triangle Shopping Center right next to Mr. Gaddy's and TrueFit. And I have super mixed feelings about it. Um, I don't want to say anything too harsh because there are some people at that church that the school is based out of who are like genuinely nice. And I've heard the place has changed a lot since I went there. But it wasn't fun for me in a lot of ways. You know, you hear grace preached from the pulpit, but that wasn't necessarily what we'd receive all the time. It's funny, I remember there was this one woman there who I can't even remember her name, but she was just a wholly unpleasant individual. She wasn't even a teacher, I think. And she was just, her default was antagonistic. And I'm like, dang, okay, I am really having to do a deep dive on where this audio is. Oh yeah, back to the subject. Yeah. And some teachers were, I guess you could say they were complex individuals. But I'm sure there's going to be some who's like, well, school's not supposed to be easy, but I get the idea of being challenged and being put out of your comfort zone, but and I have friends who I know things were much harder for them. They went to much harsher environments in school, but I don't know. It'd be one thing if like my teachers were actually good at what they did. There's one or two who I'm like, yeah, they were cool, or they became cool. I remember there was this one woman who, I don't want to give her credit. I don't even want to like give her any notoriety, but so in retrospect, I sort of lost respect for her. We were kind of cool, but I remember one thing that bugs me is this might be a little too much for some listeners, but I remembered hearing a rumor going on in the school that a male teacher said to some of the students who weren't listening to him, I can make you feel very uncomfortable. And something about that just didn't strike me as right. Because it's like, well, what does uncomfortable mean? Now, it could be entirely possible that uncomfortable in the early 2000s doesn't mean what uncomfortable means now in the post Me Too era. And normally I was a submissive, like, do what you're told kind of kid. But this seemed like a point of a little red flag where it's like, okay, this person might be in charge, but this sounds wholly inappropriate. And again, it was just a rumor, but I brought this up with said teacher that I'm talking about. Not the one who allegedly said it, but a teacher who I used to have respect for. And anyway, I said, I heard a rumor that a teacher said this to their to students that they could make them feel very uncomfortable, and I don't think that's appropriate. And she's like, well, sometimes it's necessary. And I'm like, no, I should have said you are wrong. And I guess I'm I was so I was such a submissive, obedient type that I'm like, well, she says it's okay, but something still irked me about it. I wish I had been a bit more defiant to her. Like, I wish I had pressed the point of like, no, you're wrong. I don't care what you say. You are wrong. Even if I got sent to the principal's office. Because honestly, I feel like our grades got in trouble a lot. Um, that's the thing. The problem with group punishments is it gives very little incentive for the people who are behaving to actually behave. Because it's like, well, if we're all going to get punished as a group, then, you know, what is the point of being good or trying to obey? It's just really discouraging. And I know so the only way that that works is, I think in the old days of the military, like, people get punished as a group, and when they would, the people who didn't do anything, they would beat the crap, excuse the language, out of the true offender, and that person would really, yeah, they'd learn a lesson that way. So, yeah. Okay. So, dang. Alrighty, everybody. Well, it looks like I will have to do some. All right. So, I found the audio files. It's going to take some. It's going to take some work. I remember. It's so funny. These days, I worked so hard to be able to pass in that class. Like, I, the only reason like I didn't just give up was because when I was in high school, like, this is embarrassing, but I had a really huge crush on this one girl, and the only reason I bothered to pass was I just wanted to be in the same class as her. And I remember in, what was it? I was in ninth grade and I was not doing well, especially in math. Big surprise. And the teacher said, like, look, your grade average is not great. Um, in order to in order to be able to go to the 10th grade, you will have to get B's on the final two exams. And I'm like, okay, I can't not pass. Failing is not an option, and I don't want to not be in the same class as this girl. So I really studied hard, and I got B's on both those exams. Funny thing is, we studied Latin in that grade, and I think I didn't do so great. I think I made a 69 something, but they were like, you know what? We'll just let him go. They didn't press me on that. So I go through ninth grade. Ninth grade was actually a relatively good year. It was pretty peaceful. I think I had plans to skip ninth grade. Well, I remember I wanted to quit school after ninth grade, just get my GED. But for whatever reason, my dad said, no, you have to go into 10th grade. And it was just like, I really wish I'd been rebellious and not listened to him. Like, you can spank me as much as you want, punish me, but if that's the price of being free, then I will endure that. I I wish I'd been a bit more defiant. But anyway, I passed ninth grade, I go into 10th grade, and that's awesome. And then, like, a couple weeks into 10th grade, I find out the girl I liked, who I tried, who I was like, I have to be in the same grade as her, the same class. I find out that she abruptly leaves and goes to another school. And it really felt like, what was all that work for? And I really blamed one of my particular teachers, who was just an absolute tool. And the thing is, this guy showed no grace at all. We had like a surprise quiz, and he said, like, when he announced the grade, he's like, you all failed. You got the heading wrong. And man, it's been a long time, but even just talking about it, I get upset at him. I'm so tempted to just drop his name. Like, say, oh yeah, it was so and so, but at the same time, I don't want to make him known at all. I guess I can talk about it, but the way I forgive is just, not to put his name out there. I don't know. But anyway, he apparently had like a rough childhood. I think his mom had him in high school, never really knew his dad, had a messed up family life. While where he would start breaking down and crying, how to show grace. And this adult figure who does not know how to show grace. And this adult figure who does not know how to show grace. And this adult figure who does not know how to show grace. This adult figure who does not know how to show grace. He just starts having these little meltdowns. It's like, I don't know how to show grace. He just starts having these little meltdowns. It's like, what do you do? I really wish our school had been much more selective when it came to, all right, this person's going to be a teacher, but you're going to be in here for the long haul, right? And it's like, yeah. Teachers meetings and be like, okay, we can't have you going. You're going to be in here for the long haul, right? And it's like, yeah. Teachers meetings and be like, okay, we can't have you going. You're going to be in here for the long haul, right? And it's like, yeah. But teachers meetings and be like, okay, we can't have you going. You're going to be in here for the long haul, right? And it's like, yeah. But teachers meetings and be like, okay, we can't have you going. You're going to be in here for the long haul, right? And it's like, yeah. But then, a couple weeks later, be like, hey guys, I'm sorry, I got to bail out. And it's like, they have families and stuff, so it's understandable. Um, Sometimes in retrospect, for those of you who don't know, there was a bookstore in the Forum Shopping Center up until about 2011. And it was like maybe a 20-minute walk from my school. But sometimes I feel like maybe I should have followed my impulses back in seventh grade. Sometimes I think day one I should have been like, this is not for me. I'm going to disobey. I'm going to drop out. And if anybody wants to find me, I will be at the bookstore. Tell my dad I don't care. I'm not participating in this. And part of me wishes maybe I had started working sooner, because back then you could work at 14, and I think the rules weren't as strict about what you could or couldn't do. Or like there wasn't this thing of like you can only work this hours. People were a bit more flexible. There's all kinds of what ifs I have. Like, what if I hadn't sort of dropped the ball on making movies? Because it's like I did make a movie in from 2019 to like 2021. So let's see. Let's see. 2017, I made The Ride. 2019 is when I started to make the movie in question is called Vigilante. So let's see. So 21. So technically I've only had like a 3-year absence of where I've just not made anything. Okay. But, there are all kinds of what ifs. Like, what if I had been a bit more diligent with studying Korean? Oh yeah, for those of you who don't know, but I've probably mentioned this before, I tried to study Korean. I even had this idea towards the end of 2022. I was going to do a 3-month study, like intensive thing, and then all kinds of personal family drama just came out of nowhere. And I'm like, whoa, what the heck? Um, yeah, some family drama. Some people got sick, which led to some people passing away. Well, yeah. So it's like, oh man, definitely a sort of a geez, Rick moment. But we can't really deal with, scenarios of what if. All we can, the most productive thing we can do is think of what we're going to do now. I guess if there's any point to what if scenarios, it's it is to think about like, okay, there was something bad that happened or something unfavorable. How do we avoid that so we don't repeat something in the future? And yeah, I guess that's if there's a reason to hypothesize and think about past events, to like dwell on them, that would be it. Well, I could probably have a whole podcast about um, I could have a whole podcast about like everything I don't like about my old school, but I will try not to dwell on that. It's funny. I've heard over the years the idea of what is forgiveness, and you have to forgive somebody, and dang, it is a real challenge to. And I'm trying to. So anyway, what is forgiveness? I remember, okay, I'm gonna have to delve into my school again, but but one thing, let's see. Okay, I found forgiveness. Yeah, delving into my old school, which I don't like to, but I think it is for a good point. Um, so, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about 9/11 for a second. And this is just recollecting or recalling what I went through. It's funny, the day it happened, um, some teacher had the idea of coming into a classroom and saying, like, this might have been the day after, or what is it? Or like a couple days after. I can't remember. But I just remember like the day that 9/11 did happen. It was two girls' birthday, and we're all happy and stuff. And then one teacher says, like, did you hear about the two towers? And then people started coming and getting picked up from school. Um, my mom took us to Kmart to go buy supplies. That was the busiest I ever saw Kmart. Um, anyway, went to, yeah, I'm looking at files I have not seen in forever. But anyway, we go there, and then I guess the point, sorry, I went down a rabbit hole a bit. Um, anyway, we're in class one day, either the day it happened or a couple days after, and some teacher comes in and is like, we have to forgive them, the terrorists, right? And I'm intentionally making them sound ridiculous. And the te and it's like, he does not define terms. basically, I think there's a real. I think one reason why forgiveness is such a difficult subject is because nobody ever really defines terms. Typically, I feel like the most banal sort of blanket definition of forgiveness is you think you think of people saying going through you think of the offended party, then you think the offender's like, hey man, sorry about that, and then it's put upon the offended party to say, oh, it's cool, man. And it was one of those things where it's like, I think all of us were thinking like we get held accountable for much less like egregious matters, and like, leaving the fridge open, or, not doing our homework properly, where a sorry just doesn't cut it. And they want us to forgive these people, to be like, that's cool, man. But that is not forgiveness, or that's not what it's supposed to be. Like, and this is going to sound ironic, given that I'm sort of ranting about like my old school, but I've done my best to not try and call out certain individuals, because who knows, people change, they grow. But yeah, I think forgiveness is when, you're allowed to feel angry about it, but I think forgiveness is when you choose not to feel, or not feel, when you choose not to fuel enmity. When the thought does enter your mind, you're like, you try not to dwell on it, or you don't put yourself in a scenario where conflict would arise from it. Like, I'm very upset with a lot of my old teachers, but what I do, the way I figure to forgive them, is to not put myself in a situation where I would meet them, or I try to stay as far away from them as I could, because I know I would want to confront them and call them out, probably embarrass them. Like, I'm talking about the stuff that happened, but I haven't named anybody. Who knows? Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, but as far as I can tell now, I'm not going to. Another thing that angers me is one of the teachers, the one who allegedly, and I'll stress this again, allegedly said to one of the girls in my school, I can make you feel very uncomfortable. I remember, so we kind of had we had a lot of kids from varying backgrounds. And I remember one time in class, he sat us down and said, like, or it wasn't just him, it was others as well. He would say, like, but I remember him saying it particularly, like, we got this whole thing of like, it was a Christian school, and he said, like, I want you to look at y'all's lives and like really think about how you conduct yourselves and ask if you're genuinely saved. And I'm one of those types of people who like dots their T's and crosses their I's, and I really try to make sure I'm doing something. So for him to keep saying like, are you guys sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? I'm already one of those people who's like, oh, did I do this right? Or I don't want to get in trouble. And it was a problem I kept having for years. So this person, he's like, well, you guys don't do things the way I do, so how do you know if you're even really Christian or not? and another teacher, the one who I reported his behavior to, and said like, and she was like, well, sometimes teachers need to do that. She also gave another lecture. It's like, you guys really need to think about your behavior and if you're really saved or not. If you really were saved, if you weren't saved and you behaved this way, that would be one thing. But if you're Christians, you should be acting this way. And yeah, like, so even she said that, and it was like, I mean, I get the whole thing of like, if somebody is doing something and there's a thing of like, okay, if people say they belong to a set of ideals, correct them or whatever. I'm like, hey, I don't think this is the right thing. But in my personal experience, I've been much more convinced by people leading and setting an example than I have, people shaking their fingers at me and saying like, oh, you need to do this. But anyway, the teacher, the one who allegedly said, I can make you feel very uncomfortable. So he gives us this speech about like, oh, you're not acting Christian. You have to ask, am I even saved? So he drops out of school, or he stops teaching for a bit. And then I find out years later, I didn't know why. And then years later, I'm going to sanitize this in case anybody's listening with their kids. But years later, I find out that he's looking at stuff that a married man should not look at because it would hurt his wife's feelings. And apparently he confessed this in front of the church, and he got fired from being a teacher, or maybe he stepped down of his own accord. I mean, nowadays, what with the proliferation of the internet, it's a struggle that people are much more accommodating and understanding of. But here was a teacher who, he was criticizing us for just being, most of them were just dumb high school kids, and he was making it a point of like, oh, are y'all really Christians? And meanwhile, he's engaging in behavior which is clearly not Christian. And yeah, so I forget where it says, but there is some verse in the Bible that says, it admonishes people, are like, don't be so quick to be a teacher of the law, because you will be held to a higher standard. And I think, I'd have to double check on this, but I think it says you will face a greater judgment. I think in some translations, they might even say the greater damnation. Now I have to preface this with, I think that's using it in like the actual proper biblical sense. So just because you hear me saying that, don't go around being like, oh, he said this word, so is it okay? And I'm mainly saying this to, people who might have kids listening to this. So yeah, I don't know. It is a word you will see in the Bible, but yeah, I'm just giving a yeah. So anyway, just because you heard it here, don't go repeating it all the time. Anyway, so that is a rant. But I think there's a point of, one thing that really upset me as a kid is it seemed that grown-ups could do whatever they wanted to do with little to no repercussions. Or grown-ups could do something. They could find themselves in a unfavorable situation and they could do things to ameliorate that or try to make things better. Whereas if you were a kid, you just had to go, you basically have no agency. If grown-ups find themselves in a terrible situation, they can do things to make themselves try to feel better. But if you're a kid, it's like, oh no, you just have to endure it. You just have to, it's like, you have to deal with it. We don't have to, but you just have to tough it out. We can seek comfort, but, screw you. Sorry for the language, but that is genuinely how it feels. And I'm sure there are kids, if there are kids listening, they might actually feel that way. Like, yeah, he's saying what we're all thinking. I mean, what can I say other than I'm sorry that you have to go through that, and just try to hold on. And I guess this is kind of devolving into a bit of a rant, and to try to bring it back to something positive and maybe wrap this up nicely, because I think I've gotten to the point where I have found the video, so it would need my attention to edit. I think Mr. Rogers, he was on Oprah way back when. Anyway, he was on Oprah and she asked him about what would you recommend to parents? And he said his piece of advice was try to remember what it was like when you were a kid. Try to see things from that perspective. And yeah, take it from there. Now, of course, sometimes there are moments when kids just don't know something and it's good to not listen, but I'm sure every grown-up who was once a kid, they've got a thing where it's like they can remember when they were kids and when grown-ups treated them not appropriately. And I would say to kids, like, what advice would I give in my situation? If you see or hear of a grown-up doing something that they know they shouldn't be doing, don't be afraid that just because they're a grown-up, don't be afraid about reporting it or whatever. They're supposed to be the good guys and the teachers that you learn from. So, yeah, let people know and hold them to account. And maybe you have to get in trouble, but if there are more good grown-ups than bad grown-ups, then everything is going to work out properly. But if I could, and I'm only speaking from my experience, if I had, I guess one other piece of advice would be, if you are a kid listening to this, just pay very close attention. And when you become a grown-up, decide like, okay, I'm not going to treat kids this way because it's so terrible and I'm going to be better than some of the bad grown-ups that I had to endure around. And I wish, yeah, I guess all I can say is wait, endure, and be better than them when you get to make your own choices. Well, anyway, this has been, wow, one of my longer podcast episodes. I think of recent, I think I've done long podcasts before that have stretched well into an hour or even 90 minutes, but apparently I've been talking for about 55 minutes, basically almost an hour. Well, this has been the David Wells Experiment. Have an absolutely super day, and we will see you next time. Bye.